Hello and welcome to the first episode on my channel. I created this podcast to discuss the latest happenings in politics, business and everyday life, including society and culture, to share my unfiltered opinions on the issues that matter most to me and issues that should matter to you. From the rise of wokeism to the latest cultural controversies, we'll dive into topics that are shaping our world today. I won't bore you with unnecessary ads, music, or jingles, or any other drivel that some podcasts insist on including. It will just be me and my opinion. And that's the important word right there. Opinion. Remember, opinions are like farts. Everyone does them. Some of them stink. They are hard to hold in. And when you let go, at least one person will leave the room. So there's your warning. If you don't like my opinion, leave the room. Today I want to talk about a concept that is often paraded as the cornerstone of democracy, and it's only fitting that it be the first topic to kick off my channel. And that's the idea of free speech. Now, the freedom to speak one's mind without fear of retribution, censorship or punishment. And we are led to believe that in the 21st century, in countries that wave the flag of democracy, this right is not just protected, but celebrated. Yet, as we peel back the layers of this illusion, we start to see cracks. Cracks that reveal a reality not so different from those we criticise. You see, the harsh truth is that free speech as we know it is nothing more than an illusion. Let's take a journey through history. The Nazis, the Soviet Union, North Korea. These are the regimes we point to when we want to show what happens when free speech is stripped away. These are the cautionary tales, the monstrous figures of totalitarianism that serve as our constant reminder of what happens when governments clamp down on the voices of their people. We look at the past and say, thank God we live in the free world. But are we really that free? Are we truly allowed to speak our minds, or have we merely replaced the old authoritarian boots with a softer, more palatable form of control? Take the United Kingdom for instance, and as you can probably tell, my motherland. A beacon of democracy, right? Yet it has laws that restrict what can and cannot be said in public spaces. The Public Order Act makes it illegal to say anything that might cause harassment, alarm or distress. But here's the burning question. Who decides what causes alarm? Who determines what is distressing? A nameless, faceless entity somewhere within the bureaucratic maze. A society that claims to champion free expression suddenly seems quite comfortable with putting up fences around what can and cannot be spoken. It's like walking through a minefield where the mines are invisible and can change places at any moment. One wrong word, one ill-timed comment, and you've stepped on a social bomb that can ruin your life. Now that doesn't sound like freedom to me. It sounds like fear. It sounds like control. It sounds eerily familiar to the regimes we vilify. The regimes where people are conditioned to watch what they say, not because it's illegal on paper, but because the invisible lines of censorship are always moving. Let's not pretend that it's just about protecting people from harm. The rhetoric around harassment and alarm is often a smokescreen. It's about control. It's about silencing dissent. It's about ensuring that the narrative stays within the bounds of what is deemed acceptable by those in power. And make no mistake, the tools may have evolved from the crude propaganda of the Soviet Union or the iron fist of North Korea, but the intent remains the same. Conform or be punished. Speak out of line and there will be consequences. This isn't freedom, it's a cage with invisible bars. In North Korea, people are taught to believe that their leader is a god. Any dissent is crushed brutally and swiftly. And we look at that and say, thank God we aren't them. But here's a sobering thought. Are we truly that different? Sure, we aren't marching in step under a dictator's watchful gaze, but we are still being told what to think, how to act, and what is and isn't acceptable to say. The difference is that instead of guns and gulags, we have social ostracism, job losses and public shaming. Instead of being dragged off to the gulag, we're dragged into the court of public opinion, where our lives can be dismantled at the speed of a trending hashtag. And let's be clear, I'm not talking about the type of speech that incites violence or harm. I'm talking about opinions, jokes, criticisms, things that should be the lifeblood of any free society. We've traded the physical chains of tyranny for the psychological chains of conformity. It's a soft totalitarianism, but make no mistake, it is totalitarianism nonetheless. And we criticise the North Koreans for not speaking out, for not rising up. But are we really that much braver? We don't speak out, not because we can't, but because we've been conditioned not to. The penalties may not be as severe, but the effect is the same. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is why free speech is an illusion. We are not free, we are just better managed. We are told to celebrate our freedom of speech, to cherish it as a sacred right. But it's a right that exists in name only. We live under the constant threat of cancellation, of legal action, of being labelled something vile, something we can't shake. The boundaries of acceptable speech are not set in stone, they are fluid, ever-changing, dictated by the whims of whoever holds the power. One day you're safe, the next you're on the wrong side of the invisible line. And so, we return to the question, who decides? Who decides what is harassment, what is alarm, what is distress? The answer is simple, not us. The power to speak freely has been taken from the people and placed into the hands of a few. We are not the North Koreans with their cult of personality, but we are still being told what to think, still being told what we can and cannot say. We are still being controlled, just in a subtle, more sophisticated way. So the next time someone tells you that you are free to say what you want, remember this. Your freedom is conditional. It's contingent on staying within the invisible lines. And those lines, they're not drawn by you, but by those who seek to control you. In this way, we are not so different from those we criticise. We are still living in the shadow of control. We are still bound by the invisible chains of what is deemed acceptable. We are still not free. In their eyes, free speech is not a right, it's a privilege. And like all privileges, it can be taken away in an instant. Still not convinced? Well, let's dig deeper into the concept of what legal experts call a hate crime. Now, on the surface, this might sound like a reasonable measure. Protecting individuals from being targeted because of who they are, whether it's their race, religion, disability, sexual orientation, or gender identity. But the devil, as they say, is in the details. The Crown Prosecution Service in the UK defines a hate crime as any criminal offence perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice based on these protected characteristics. Now notice the word here, perceived. It's not about intent or evidence, it's about perception. If the victim, or anyone for that matter, believes there was hostility, then it can be prosecuted as a hate crime. And let's not overlook the glaring omission. There is no clear legal definition of hostility. Instead, they rely on an everyday understanding of terms like ill will, spite, contempt, prejudice, unfriendliness, antagonism, resentment, and even dislike. Think about that for a moment. Unfriendliness and dislike. So, if I dislike someone, if I'm unfriendly, that's now the threshold for a hate crime. We've moved far beyond punishing actions and have now entered the realm of policing thoughts and feelings. We're criminalising subjective perceptions of someone's internal state. And this is where the illusion of free speech becomes crystal clear. How can we claim to be free when expressing even the most basic human emotions, dislike, disagreement, unfriendliness, can land us on the wrong side of the law? This is not a slippery slope. It's a full-on plunge into the abyss. The moment we allow the law to criminalise feelings, to punish people for their perceived thoughts, we open the door to a society where everyone is constantly under surveillance, not by the state, but by each other. We've weaponised perception and made every interaction a potential minefield. The chilling effect is real. People begin to self-censor, to tiptoe around conversations, avoiding any hint of disagreement or unfriendliness for fear of being labelled a criminal. And let's be honest, this isn't about protecting the vulnerable, it's about control. It's about ensuring that everyone conforms to an ever-narrowing band of acceptable behaviour, all dictated by the sensitivities of those who feel aggrieved. And who decides what's hostile? Not a court, not an impartial body, but the individual who perceives the slight. It's a dangerous precedent that sets the stage for a society where feelings dictate law, where subjectivity overrules objectivity, and where the mere perception of offence is enough to bring the weight of the justice system crashing down on someone's head. We are not that far removed from the days of thought police. Sure, we aren't being dragged out of our homes in the middle of the night for dissenting against the state, but let's be clear, we are being dragged into the court of public opinion, where guilt is determined not by the evidence of our actions, but by the subjective feelings of others. We've traded one form of tyranny for another, one where the rules are not written in law, but in the ever-changing, ever-sensitive social norms of the day. So where does this leave us? Well, it leaves us in a world where the lines of acceptable speech and behaviour are constantly moving, dictated by the whims of whoever feels most wronged. It's a society where you can be punished not for what you did, but for what someone else felt about what you did. And that, my friends, is not freedom. That is the very definition of control. We have rebranded the fear of speaking out as a virtue, calling it sensitivity, calling it respect, when in reality it is nothing more than a new form of censorship. Let's not pretend we are different from the regimes we criticise. Like I said, we might not have gulags or concentration camps, but we have social media platforms that can destroy a person's life in an instant. We have laws that can turn a simple disagreement into a criminal act. We have a society that tells you can say what you want, but if someone doesn't like it, you'll pay the price. So, as we pat ourselves on the back for being the champions of free speech and open dialogue, let's take a moment. Let's take a good, hard look in the mirror. Because the reflection staring back at us isn't of a free society. It's of one that has found new, insidious ways to silence dissent, to punish those who step out of line, and to maintain the illusion of freedom while tightening the noose around our necks. Free speech is not just about the right to say what is popular, safe, or agreed upon by the masses. It's the right to say what is unpopular, controversial, or even disliked. It's the freedom to be wrong, to offend, to disagree. And until we reclaim that understanding, we will remain trapped in this illusion, no freer than the citizens of the regimes we claim to abhor. And if all of this still isn't enough to shake your belief in our so-called freedom of speech, let's take a step further into a realm that feels less like reality and more like dystopian fiction. A realm where we're not even punished for our actions, but for the mere potential of committing a crime. We're inching closer to the world of Minority Report, where the government doesn't just police what you say or do, but what you might say or do. And for those that don't know what Minority Report is, it's a movie where people are arrested and convicted based on predictions of future crimes, thanks to a system that can foresee actions before they happen. It sounds like science fiction, but let's pause for a moment and think about how far we truly are from this reality. When we criminalise perceptions and feelings, when the mere expression of unfriendliness or dislike is enough to accuse someone of a hate crime, we're not all that different from the pre-crime unit. We're already punishing thoughts, motivations, and perceived intentions. The troubling part is that we've already set the legal and social frameworks that mirror this dystopia. Consider the concept of hate crime legislation, where a person's words or even their perceived hostility before any crime has been committed can escalate their legal culpability. It's no longer just about what you've done, but what you might be thinking when you do it, or even before you do anything at all. We're teetering on the brink of a society where your potential to offend, your capacity to harbour wrong thoughts, is enough to get you hauled in front of the authorities. Think about it. A careless joke, an offhand remark, an unfriendly expression, all can be dissected, analysed and weaponised against you, not for what you actually did, but for what someone perceives you might have been thinking. We've replaced the precogs of Minority Report with a new kind of thought police, one that operates on the vague, unmeasurable terrain of perception and feeling. The difference is that our pre-crime enforcers are not mystics in a vat, but a society trained to view every perceived slight as a potential hate crime. So here we are, claiming to live in a free society, yet edging ever closer to a reality where not just our actions, but our thoughts, perceptions and potential futures are under scrutiny. We've criminalised the intangible, allowing the subjective interpretations of those around us to dictate our innocence or guilt. It's not the heavy hand of a dystopian state with eyes on every corner, but a subtle, pervasive culture of suspicion where anyone, at any moment, can be accused not for what they did, but for what they might do. The truth is, we're not all that far from the world of Minority Report. We may not have the technology to predict crimes with perfect accuracy, but we have built a society where the fear of being perceived as wrong can be enough to ruin a life. We've created a system where our potential to offend, to transgress social norms, to hold an unpopular opinion is already being monitored, judged and punished, not by a machine, but by each other. In this way, the illusion of freedom is maintained, all while the boundaries of what we can and cannot say, think, or feel grow tighter. We may not be arrested for a crime before we commit it, yet, but the framework is already there. The seeds of preemptive punishment are sown in every law that criminalises perception, in every social norm that demands conformity, and in every whispered warning to watch what you say. And until we confront this uncomfortable truth, we will remain, like the citizens of Minority Report, trapped in a system where our freedom is just a fiction, and our voices are silenced before we even speak. And if you still don't believe that we're already living in a society where we're monitored, judged and punished by those around us even before we commit any crime, then let's take a short trip down memory lane to the days of COVID. Remember those times when governments set up tip lines, hotlines that encouraged citizens to report their neighbours for supposedly breaching COVID regulations. These were not just suggestions. These were formal requests for us to spy on each other, to monitor each other, to become the eyes and ears of the state. It was a system that turned neighbours into informants, all under the guise of public safety. These regulations, let's be honest, were not just about keeping people safe. They were about control, about conformity, about seeing just how far society could be pushed when fear was the driving force. It was, in essence, a social experiment, and one that worked exceptionally well. We were told to stay inside, keep our distance, and above all, report those who did not comply. And many did without hesitation. We saw people shamed, fined, and in some cases arrested and imprisoned. Not necessarily for posing a real danger, but for stepping outside the lines of what was deemed acceptable behaviour by those in power. Think about it. Overnight, our communities became surveillance networks, not just from the top down, but from within. Suddenly, everyone had the authority to judge and condemn. Your movements were no longer private, your actions no longer yours alone. One neighbour's suspicion, one report of seeing too many people gathered, or a perception of a mask worn incorrectly was enough to bring down a flood of consequences. We weren't just living under government regulations, we were living under the watchful, suspicious eyes of everyone around us. It wasn't the police you had to worry about, it was your own neighbours, your own community members, who were now empowered to enforce the rules as they saw fit. This wasn't just about health guidelines. This was a powerful demonstration of how quickly and easily society can be manipulated into policing itself. We became a self-monitoring, self-correcting organism, driven not by logical reason, but by fear and a sense of moral superiority. It was a chilling glimpse into how fragile our freedoms really are. One moment, we're living our lives with a semblance of autonomy, and the next, we're locked inside, our every movement scrutinised, not just by authorities, but by those we live alongside. And the most alarming part? How easily we fell into line. How quickly we accepted that our freedoms could be suspended indefinitely in the name of the greater good. How readily we turned on each other. How effortlessly we became complicit in a system that was more about compliance than safety. The tip lines, the reports, the constant scrutiny, these weren't just tools for managing a public health crisis. They were tests. Tests of how much control could be exerted over us, and how willing we were to surrender our rights for a sense of security that, for many, was nothing more than an illusion. So here we are, in a world where the concept of freedom is dangled in front of us like a carrot on a stick, just out of reach. We're told we are free, yet our actions, our words, our very thoughts are constantly under surveillance, judged not just by those in power, but by our peers. We've become both the prisoners and the wardens in a societal experiment where conformity is the ultimate goal, and individuality, dissent, and non-compliance are the new crimes. The days of COVID were a stark reminder that the tools of control are always at the ready, waiting for the right moment to be deployed. We saw it with the tip lines, with public shaming, with neighbours turning against neighbours, not because they wanted to, but because they were told it was their civic duty. It was a microcosm of how easily our freedoms can be eroded, not by force, but by persuasion, by convincing us that it's for our own good, for the good of society. And just like that, the illusion of freedom slips away, replaced by a new reality where our every move, every word, and every perceived thought can be monitored, judged, and punished, not by some distant authority, but by those we see every day. If you think we're free, think again. Because as we've seen, it only takes a whisper, a tip, a perception, and suddenly, the world we thought was safe and free reveals its true colours. The illusion shatters, and we're left facing the uncomfortable truth that maybe, just maybe, we've never been as free as we've been led to believe. And if you still don't believe me, if you still think you can say what you want without repercussion, especially if you hold a conservative viewpoint, if you still think people don't lose their jobs for simply having an opinion, then I'm envious of you. Envious of your ignorance of the world. Envious of your blissful detachment from the harsh reality that so many of us have faced. Because here's the truth. I myself have lost my job for simply voicing an opinion that somebody didn't like. It wasn't a radical statement. It wasn't hate speech. It wasn't even directed at anyone in particular. It was simply my viewpoint, my right to express what I believed in. And yet, that was enough. The perception of how my words made someone feel was given more weight than any fact or context. Feelings have overtaken facts. Subjective interpretations have been elevated above objective truth. And this is the world we live in now. A world where it doesn't matter what you actually said, what you intended, or even what's true. All that matters is how someone felt about it. We've reached a point where the court of public opinion can dismantle a person's livelihood in an instant, where accusations are enough to ruin reputations, and where dissent from the approved narrative is a surefire way to be ostracised, silenced, or worse. Think about it. In a world where feelings trump facts, where personal discomfort is treated as an undeniable truth, how can anyone feel truly free to speak their mind? We've set up a system where people walk on eggshells, constantly monitoring their words, their tone, their very thoughts, lest they be accused of offending someone. It's a system that thrives on fear and uncertainty, where the rules are not just vague, they're invisible, shifting, and often applied retroactively. You can lose your job, your social standing, your entire career, not for what you did, but for how someone else decided to interpret it. Look at what's happening on social media at the moment. Celebrities being judged on things they said 20 years ago. This isn't freedom. This is a new kind of tyranny. One where the enforcers aren't faceless government officials, but your co-workers, your friends, even strangers online. They hold the power to make or break you, not based on any real wrongdoing, but on their own subjective experience of your words. And the worst part, there's no room for dialogue, no opportunity for explanation, no chance to clarify or correct. Once you're labelled, once you've been deemed offensive or problematic, there's no going back. You are guilty until proven innocent. And in most cases, innocence is a luxury you'll never be afforded. Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't be considerate of others, or that we should be free to say whatever we want without thinking of the consequences. But there's a vast difference between being mindful of others and living in constant fear of being misinterpreted. There's a vast difference between holding people accountable for real harm and weaponizing personal feelings to control, silence, or destroy. We've crossed that line, and now we're reaping the consequences. This is not a society built on free speech. This is a society built on fear of the mob, on the unpredictable and often irrational reactions of others. It's a society where being offended is a currency, a tool to wield power, and where the loudest, most aggrieved voices are given the most authority. And for what? To create a world where everyone agrees? To force a uniformity of thought where no one dares step out of line? That's not freedom. That's oppression, dressed up in the guise of progress. So yes, if you still think you can say what you want without repercussion, if you still believe that the world is a place where differing opinions are welcomed, then I envy you. I envy your naivety, your faith in a system that no longer exists, and maybe never did exist. But I also urge you to wake up, because the longer we allow feelings to trump facts, the longer we let perceptions dictate reality, the further we drift from the freedoms we claim to cherish. And one day, you might find yourself on the wrong side of that line, wondering how we got here, realising too late that the world you thought was free was nothing but a comforting lie. And if you're still a naysayer, still sitting there shouting at me, well, if you weren't free, then you wouldn't be able to say this right now, would you? Well, let me tell you, that is the illusion. That's all it is. A carefully constructed facade to make you think you're free, to let you believe that you can say what you want, so long as it doesn't disrupt the status quo. But let's put that illusion to the test. Let's see how long it takes YouTube, or any other platform for that matter, to silence this message, or any message I put on this channel. Because the moment I say something that crosses the invisible line, that offends the wrong group, or that dares to challenge the narrative, watch how quickly that freedom evaporates. And I'll be here to tell you when it happens, trust me. I mean, look at what's happening now. Governments are pushing to fine social media companies for allowing the spread of what they call misinformation. But what is misinformation really? Who decides what's true and what's false? Who controls that narrative? Once again, we're confronted with the uncomfortable truth that the so-called gatekeepers of information have the power to determine what we see, what we hear, and ultimately what we're allowed to believe. It's not about protecting the public, it's about controlling the conversation, about narrowing the scope of acceptable discourse until it aligns with whatever agenda those in power wish to promote. We're told it's for our own good, to keep us safe from falsehoods and lies. But who gets to define what a lie is? Shouldn't we be trusted to form our own judgment on what we believe or don't believe? What if the misinformation is simply a perspective that doesn't align with the mainstream? What if it's an inconvenient truth that challenges the status quo? By handing over the power to censor and punish, we're essentially allowing governments and corporations to play the ultimate arbiters of truth, wielding their influence to shape the narrative in their favour. It's not about fact-checking, it's about thought control, about ensuring that the only voices left are the ones that echo the approved message. And that is why I created this channel, this podcast. That is why I will voice my opinion, because enough is enough. I refuse to be silenced by the ever-shifting rules of what's considered acceptable. I refuse to let my voice be drowned out by a culture that prioritises feelings over facts, that punishes dissent with job loss, social ostracism and public shaming. This is my way of pushing back, of standing up against the erosion of true freedom, of reclaiming a space where honest discussion and diverse viewpoints can be heard without fear. But unfortunately, as I've already explained, true freedom is an illusion, and that is why I will not show my face on this podcast. That is why I will not reveal my real name. Yes, Dean Albert is not my real name. I've been a victim of the cancel culture that permeates this world. I have lost a previous well-paying job because my liberal employer at the time did not believe in free speech. They made the decision to end my career on the whim of someone who disliked my opinion, and I cannot take that risk again. I won't be silenced, but I also can't sacrifice the employment that puts a roof over my family's head and food in our bellies. And it's funny how that wasn't considered a hate crime. Funny how the scales of justice tilt only one way. We're told that hate crimes are about protecting people from hostility, from prejudice. But where is the protection for those of us who just want to speak freely? Where is the line drawn when it comes to the hostility we face, simply for daring to voice an unpopular opinion? We talk about inclusivity, about tolerance, about creating a world where everyone feels safe. But safe for whom? Clearly not those who dissent. Clearly not for those who think differently. So yes, one day, maybe, just maybe one day, I may show you my face and tell you my real name. I hope that day is soon. I hope it comes when we've managed to reclaim some semblance of the freedoms we once took for granted, when we can speak openly without the fear of being hunted down by those who disagree. Until then, I will continue to speak out, to share my thoughts, and to challenge the prevailing narratives. But I'll do it all without showing my face or revealing my name. This channel, this podcast, is my stand against the creeping tyranny of enforced conformity. My effort to shine a light on the reality behind the illusion of freedom. I hope that by doing so, I inspire others to question, to push back, and to fight for a world where all voices, whether they agree with the mainstream or not, can be heard. We cannot allow ourselves to be spoon-fed a version of reality dictated by a select few who deem themselves the gatekeepers of truth. So I sit here, behind a pseudonym, hidden from view, not out of fear of being wrong, but out of fear of the consequences of being right, of saying something that doesn't fit the mould, of speaking truths that make people uncomfortable. I know how this game works. I've been on the receiving end of it. I've watched as my career was torn down, not by reason or logic, but by the knee-jerk reactions of a culture that values feelings over facts. And that is why I refuse to show my face. Because I know that the moment I step out of line, the moment I say something that doesn't fit the accepted narrative, there will be a target on my back. So to those who still think this is freedom, who believe that I can say what I want without consequence, I ask you, how free am I really if I have to hide who I am to protect myself from the mob? How free are any of us if the cost of speaking our minds is our livelihoods, our reputations, our very identities? This is not freedom. This is a high-stakes game of compliance, where only those who play by the rules get to keep their voices. And the rest? We're silenced, shadow banned, cancelled, erased from the conversation altogether. And this isn't just about me. This is about all of us who have watched as the world we thought was open and free slowly closes in around us, where every word is weighted against the shifting sands of public opinion. We're told we're free, but in reality, we're prisoners of perception, shackled by the fear of offending, of stepping out of line, of being the next one to lose everything because someone somewhere decided our thoughts were too dangerous. So here I am, Dean Albert, speaking from the shadows, not because I want to, but because I have to. Because this is the only way I can be heard without being silenced. This is the only way I can tell you the truth without being erased. And if you think that's freedom, if you think that's the world we should accept, then I envy your ignorance. But for the rest of us who know better, who have felt the sting of silence, who have lost for simply speaking, we know that freedom is just a word they use to keep us quiet, a carrot they dangle while they tighten the leash. So thank you for listening, for being a part of this conversation. Your support means more than you know. And while we navigate this complex, often frustrating landscape, remember, the fight for true freedom is ongoing, and it begins with each of us refusing to be silenced, no matter the cost. Let's stand together and demand a world where free speech is more than an illusion, where it's a living, breathing reality for everyone. Because when we give up the right to speak freely, we give up the right to think freely, and that is a cost too great for any society to bear. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care. Goodbye.